Welcome, 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 and thank you for joining us another episode of today's Electrical Estimating. I'm your co-host, Chris Traumer, and as always, I'm joined by our other co-host, Sal Huerta.
Hello, everyone.
So, Sal, today is the final episode of a three-part series we did with Matt Firestone. So far, we've covered people and processes, and today is about profit. Something stuck out to me when we were talking to Matt in this episode. He was discussing and talking about, sort of finding a niche. If you're a contractor and you can find a niche where you fit into that space and you really devote a lot of your time and resources of getting yourself like a great specialty in, say, hospitals or whatever it may be, that right there can help drive not only your profit margin, but also bring in a lot of business from either word of mouth or whatever it may be. Before we jumped on here, it had me thinking all the way back to when we were speaking with Barney. I mean, it's amazing that it was almost 18 episodes ago about the checklist he does when looking at bid invitations. He mentioned too that they look for specific jobs, that they have a specialty, and that's what they go after first and foremost, because he knows that his guys can get it done fast. They know what they're doing, they know the products they're going to have to use. So it really allows him to sometimes put his bid a little bit higher, but people know that they can get it done on time and get it done correctly. But at the same time, it sometimes lets them come in a little bit lower because they know they can get it done a lot quicker than other companies.
And that really makes sense because, like you talked about, not only does their personnel understand that job and they can do it faster, but when you go to buying, investments in things, trucks or this or that are bigger expenditures, you can now streamline them to what type of jobs fit those things. So you're not buying excess stuff or doing other things, trying to be the jack of all trades and trying to buy, be a niche. A little bit of everything. This way, like you said, if you specialize more, it makes things so much easier for you.
Yeah, and it was a little funny hearing it from Barney, weeks and weeks, I think months ago, and then for Matt to bring that same thing up. And I don't think he's saying that every contractor should have their own specialty, their own little niche, but that it seemed like, at least if you're starting out or if you're finding it difficult to grow, there's circumstances that you should maybe look into that sort of niche market that you can start building your company around.
Absolutely. And then you also talked a little bit about the profit side of it. And that's something that obviously you think, well, that's a given. That's what you should do. But people look at profit differently. I remember I was talking to a contractor decades and decades ago, and he was a service repair contractor, and he had an hourly wage. And then what he would do is he would take his materials and just double them, and he thought he was making money. But the reality was, when it comes to profit, if you don't have overhead and all these other costs associated with the job, you're losing money. So Matt does a really good job of defining a little more about profit.
All right. Well, let's not waste any more time and jump into the episode. And I'll catch you next week, Sal. Take care. Third pillar, from what I could see and what you mentioned before, is profit, correct?
Yes.
That seems like what everybody would want to hear. I mean, there's so many people we talk about, and when the conversation gets to a certain point, it's all about profit. What's the third pillar of profit for you guys? How does that work?
Sure. So, big picture, we're talking, revenue, of course. How do we increase revenue? But at the same time, it's how do we minimize overhead and try to get more to the bottom line? But as I said before, so much of it goes back to the estimate that if we don't have a good estimate to start with, it doesn't matter how much work we're doing. And unfortunately, I've worked with some contractors that didn't understand cost and estimating, and they thought they were going to be able to survive just on volume. Well, if you get more and more volume, more and more projects, but don't have all your costs covered, don't have any profit in your estimates, you're just creating an exponential problem at that point. So it's really breaking it down to the fundamentals of understanding our cost, whether that's on the project level, and then we, look at that larger scale, the company level. So how are we managing material? How are we managing labor, our direct project costs? Are we covering our overhead expenses in each one of those estimates? And although we may put profit on each job, if we have a mistake in an estimate or we have something go wrong on a project, the only place that money can come from is our profit, or if we have slow times or a rainy day. So we need to make sure that we understand that we have an accurate takeoff of the material. We've looked at the labor, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about before with who makes a better estimator, somebody that came from the field or somebody that came from the an educated or education side of things, the university, community college, that everybody can bring a different perspective to that to make sure that we do have things covered, understanding our direct job expenses, our permits, parking, travel expenses, non-productive time. And I would say the one that people miss the most is not truly understanding their overhead cost of operating their business. And, overhead costs are those costs we have, whether we have one project, no projects, or 100 projects. And there's a lot of contractors that don't understand how to calculate that number, and in turn don't carry enough in their estimate. Well, so and so told me it's 10%, or so and so said it's 15%. Well, each company, it's going to be different and unique to that company based on their expenses and what it costs to operate their business. I've worked with some contractors that are very frugal with where they spend money and, do a fair amount of work, but they don't have fancy trucks. They don't have a big fancy office. It's kind of bare bones minimum of what they need. Well, their overhead percentage is going to be a lot lower than a small business, a maybe solopreneur that has one or two other employees, but they go out and buy a fancy $100,000 leather seat truck and deck it out with all the new tools. They go out and buy a new backhoe, and they go out and buy new benders and the latest, cordless drill, instead of using, maybe older tools, trying to get as much life out of those. So they may do 10% of what that other company did, but their overhead could be 40% of what their sales are because of the expenses, what they choose to pay themselves, and how they spend their money. So that's one of the things that we really try to make sure contractors understand, or what are their costs on the project level and of operating their business, because the cost of operating their business then trickle down into each of their projects, into their estimate, and making sure that all of those are covered, so that at least they have a good foundation to start with the estimate as they then go into actually building the project. We talk about the transition from bidding the project to building the project. And if we don't have a good, solid estimate to work from, it's going to be real hard to make money on the project. And like I said before, I don't know of any contractors that have been successful of being profitable on the volume that they do if they don't have a good estimate to start with in the beginning.
We were talking with somebody early on when we started the podcast, owner, operator, estimator, and he said one of the biggest things that he looks at is when to walk away when his profit margin isn't enough. He's like, it'd be great if I go and I get every single job out there, but if my profit margin's too low, it becomes too risky for me, because if anything else happens or something else unforeseen occurs, that eats right into my profit, and I'm doing this job for free. He's like, so it took me a while to understand I don't need to take every single job that's out there, that I have to really look at what my profit's going to be, understand what the risk is for the job, and try to mitigate risk as well, so that I'm taking the jobs that are not only profitable, but isn't as risky for me in the long term.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't know if it's the competitive nature of business owners, of you don't like losing, and in construction there seems to be a lot of that when we're bidding work, but it's how do you move on to that next one. And that's what I tell especially the small businesses. If you're getting every proposal or every bid that you submit, you're probably not charging enough for what you're doing. You don't have all your costs covered. If people are turning around within 24, 40 hours and saying, yep, let's move forward with this project, you're probably too cheap. But on the flip side, if you're getting 1 out of 100 jobs that you bid, it could be the other way. So it's finding that balance of getting enough work in the business to do, but knowing that we don't necessarily want everything. And like you said, there's certain times where maybe the best thing is to just walk away from that. Too much risk, even though we can make good money on it. One little thing goes wrong, we could have that all that profit go away. And it's not so much the financial, but sometimes it's even the reputation. Everybody likes the high profile projects, but then everybody's watching that. The community, the construction industry, it's in the news. So there could be one little slip up on that project and you still make money on it, but it could be a black eye to you and your business that's going to affect your ability to get more work in the future.
Yeah, I feel like if I was coming up and I was new, it'd be like, I want every single possible job that's out there. I don't care if it's 2% profit or 30%. Like, I want to work and get as much as possible and get my name out there so that everybody knows who I am and build my future. But it seems like that's probably not the best formula to success if you're running after every single job that's out there and not really taking time, like you said, to look at your overhead and the profit margins and the risk that's associated with those jobs.
Yeah, and that's I've seen it with the companies I've worked with. I've seen it with my own company. Even with our consulting work, is if you try to be the everything to everyone, you just have such a big pool of competition on that there's always going to be somebody that can do it cheaper or they don't understand their costs. You see it in the construction industry, maybe more so in the residential side of things. But people that are doing side jobs, they may not have the same insurance you do. They may not do the same level of quality. There's a lot of things that factor into that. When you can ratchet down that niche and say, this is what we're the best at,
Mhm.
then people are paying you for the value you provide, the solution that you provide. You're not just selling a commodity of electrical parts and pieces and electricians' time. They truly value you as a solutions provider. And that's where, to your analogy, we can get a higher profit margin, but have a lot lower risk because we're good at it. It's in our wheelhouse. Our employees know how to solve these problems, get through that project. And in turn, we're not gouging our customer and charging them more than somebody else. We're just able to do it that much more efficiently than others that are trying to do the same type of work.
Now, is that something that smaller companies just starting out should be looking at? Is that particular niche instead of maybe being open to anything that's out there? Narrow in from the get go. Okay, this is what we're going to specialize in. Yeah, we can maybe take something over here, over there, but really narrow in from the get go of, this is going to be our specialty and this is what we're going to do.
That would be my approach to it and kind of how we approach things. What I've found with my experience is if you get real good at something, people are going to start seeking you out for kind of the peripheral pieces around that too. And it's much easier to sell to someone that's looking to buy versus going out and try to find someone to sell your services to, if that makes sense. If you have an engaged buyer that came to you and says, so and so said you're the best at this, I have this project, I know it's not exactly the same, but can you do it? They already see some of that value that you provide, and it's going to be a lot easier to close that deal at the level that you want than just going out there and doing your advertising, bidding all these projects that take time and resources to bid the work. Finding those people that are seeking you out as that solutions provider more so than being that generalist. Think of the medical industry. Who are the doctors that make the most? Well, they're the specialists. You don't go to a general practitioner with your most difficult, sophisticated medical problem. It's the same thing in the construction industry. If you specialize in a very unique niche or market segment, you're going to be able to command the prices that you want because people are seeking you out as that solutions provider, that expert, more so than just a commodity of everybody else that can do the work.